Being a financial person for much of my life, I've seen a lot of line item budgets, but I've never seen a cancer line item on the budget. And certainly if you did that, it would probably single-handedly be the largest dollar amount on that budget.
The saying goes that sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. Focusing on just one thing can sometimes lead you to really miss the bigger picture. And when it comes to cancer, there are so many trees that you just can't help but see the forest. Breast cancer is the second leading cause of death for women in Travis County, Texas. That's where Austin is. When we widen that view a little, over 40,000 women will die from this disease in the United States just this year, 2017. Okay, but let's keep zooming out. In the entire world, there were over 14 million cancer diagnoses in 2012. Talk about a forest. I'm Suzanne Stone, and this is the More Than Pink podcast. Now, you probably recognize the name LiveStrong and know their signature yellow bracelet, but you might not know Greg Lee. He's their CEO. His background is finance, and he's an expert when it comes to understanding the true cost of cancer. LiveStrong reaches out to everyone on that journey, and with 14 million worldwide fighting this disease, he's got his work cut out for him. LiveStrong is a nonprofit, but it's not like a lot of other cancer nonprofits. Tell me how it's more than just a yellow band.
Well, thanks, Suzanne, for asking. There are approximately 1.3 million public charities in the country by last count. And I think about 35,000 plus or minus declare cancer is their topic of choice and their issue. And the vast majority of the people that make up that 35,000, their focus is on the disease, on the science and the research and the biology and the chemistry. And all that stuff's extremely important and very, very valuable. Obviously, if we don't do the research and the science, then we can't find a cure and we can't find the next generations of solutions for the problems we face. But LiveStrong is a little bit different. Where most of these others are focused on the disease, LiveStrong is focused on the person who has the disease and the challenges and the hurdles and the things that they go through as a human and as an individual, as a mother, a father, a grandmother, a grandfather, brother, sister, and the issues that they go through. And so that is one primary factor that kind of helps form and shape the LiveStrong vision and mission and makes us a little bit different. A second thing that I think it is really important to highlight is that part of that mission is also to just continue to share the message that when a person is diagnosed with cancer, there is life after cancer, and there's hope, and there's inspiration, and there's a lot of activities, and most of those that you can continue to do, and things rock and roll right along. But you need to be in charge of what that looks like and how you kind of control your attitude and your emotions and your response. And rather than letting cancer take over your life, you actually begin to live strong and take control over it as you go through your treatment regime and kind of dealing with that. So those are two of the highlights about LiveStrong that make us a little bit different that I think are important to share with listeners.
I think it's also interesting that your perspective is national and is very holistic from that point of view. So I think you get to see things and you're looking at things a little bit different than, say, Coleman, Austin, where our focus is 5 counties in the Austin area.
That's very accurate, Suzanne. And I think another element, not just geographic diversity, but it's not just about one type of cancer. As we know, there's more than 225 at last count different types and diagnosis codes. And so we focus on kind of the common elements among all types of cancer. And so we're trying to help the patient, the caregiver, the nurse practitioner, with all of those things that cross over kind of the broad spectrum of cancer types and, quite frankly, geographic barriers. We do a lot of work in this country, in the United States, but we also do a lot of work outside this country in kind of helping reduce that stigma associated with cancer as a disease.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because the cost of cancer is huge, and it's not really just, it's not limited to the emotional cost of the individual who actually has cancer. It's far-reaching beyond that.
Very accurate. I think everybody wants to focus on the cost and the out-of-pocket expenses or the healthcare-related cost of the constituent. But I think sometimes we forget that a cancer diagnosis, number one, is unique from a broken arm or something like that. You know, you go in for a broken arm and a doctor will help reset it, put you in a cast, and 6 weeks later you come back and he'll take the cast off and maybe put you through several regimes of physical therapy and things will be okay. And I don't mean to oversimplify a broken arm, but compared to a diagnosis like cancer that, quite frankly, will be with not only you but your family for the rest of your life. And so it is dramatically different. I think the other part that you hit upon is it's not just the cost associated with medical expenses. It's the other type of financial or cost impact that it has, not just on you as a family, but on the healthcare system in any locality, and how they deal with it, how the health centers or the community centers or some health districts deal with that, you know, depending on where they are in the country. So there's a much broader implication than just, you know, what's the out-of-pocket costs associated with, you know, with treatment.
And in those smaller communities, when we talk about community care in that local community, so much of the United States, so much of Texas is rural. For Coleman Austin, a substantial amount of the area that we serve happens to be very rural, and there's a really high cost there for the communities when somebody gets cancer.
No, you're exactly right, and I think that's one of the things that is a little bit unique about cancer. You know, more than 80% of the people that are diagnosed are not treated for cancer in a major healthcare facility in a major metropolitan area. They are treated and handled in local community hospitals or clinics in rural America and in rural Texas. And I think sometimes a lot of the focus on cancer care has been on those larger institutional and academic centers, and that's all important. We need to have that. But we also need to realize that when a person has cancer in their local community, they still ought to have access to the right kind of care. They shouldn't suffer and experience a poor cancer journey just because of where they, you know, choose to live.
What kind of things can we do as communities to change that access? And what do you see happening from, you know, a nationwide perspective? Do you see a shift or a change to come together somehow and financially support these smaller, local, often nonprofit clinics that are handing out care that they're often not being reimbursed for?
Well, I'd like to tell you that I have all the solutions to that. There's a lot of really smart people that are working on it, but I think there's several common denominators that are being discussed and talked about that serve as the foundation for change. I think one of those is there just has to be a recognition first and an awareness by the general public about the problem. And I don't know that Joe Q. Public is aware of the cost of care that the communities and others are absorbing, and really what that looks like. And then when you spread it out to rural America or rural Texas, I don't think they fully understand that. So I think part of it is an awareness. I think the other thing is a willingness to look at some new models and some new value-based types of mechanisms and models. I think sometimes we're trying to solve today's problem with a solution from yesterday, and I don't know that may work. I think ultimately the solution will be a new solution that addresses new problems. And I know, as an example, there are a number of folks, including ourselves, who are working with the Dell Medical School and the LIVESTRONG Cancer Institute there at value-based models that are not solely reimbursement or claims-based models. They're broader, they're more holistic. There's a focus on prevention and wellness and nutrition and all these other things that are important in addition to just the medical care that a person receives. So I think it's got to start with the awareness, and I think there has to be a willingness to embrace some new, innovative solutions to try to get us there. And then I think finally, I think there has to be an agreement among parties that we have an obligation to take care of ourselves, and is there some way that we can pool resources and find ways to appropriately allocate costs and associated with that. It's not, in my opinion, personally, it's not fair that you have one or two or three institutions that are absorbing all of the surplus costs for care like this. And this is not just limited to cancer, but that should be probably a little more pooled approach where everybody shares in that cost, because it is a societal issue. It's not limited to that particular healthcare institution.
You talk about specific costs, and I'd love it if you could put like a real cost on that. Is there an actual dollar figure you could give us? We talk about the high cost, and I think it's all relative, but I'm not sure that everybody understands when we're talking about maybe it's a clinic in the middle of Austin. What kind of things are they absorbing? What is their cost when a cancer patient walks in the door, or a patient walks in the door who's diagnosed with cancer? They have no insurance. They fall in that gap, and they're in that working poor definition. Those are certainly the people that Komen specifically helps to fund. But we're looking at those gap people, and those are the people that really are costing a lot of money and end up not getting care because they can't get treated. What is the cost of that? What does it cost to treat somebody?
You know, there's such a wide range of that it's really hard to peg and put a precise dollar amount on it. I think what I would feel comfortable in sharing with the group is just kind of give them an idea of the types of things that go on. You know, oftentimes a person who comes in and is not feeling well and has symptoms, you know, this is not something where typically, you know, you have one simple test and you know, you have a strep throat or a flu bug or something else. It's usually a larger number of tests. Everything from blood and specimen. There's a whole wide variety of things that they may do, whether it's also x-rays, mammograms, you know, different types of kind of exploratory tests just to kind of understand more about the disease, and then more about whether it's spread and what diagnosis is occurring. I think the other thing that has to happen is that every patient is going to be treated differently based upon their age, their physical well-being, the types of medications and the types of treatment that might be appropriate for them individually as an individual, as opposed to just, you know, one-size-fits-all kind of treatment. I think the other things that happen that most people don't think about is, you know, think about the doctor's office. They don't think about the cost at home when a parent has to go to the doctor and have treatment, and what do they do in terms of daycare? What do they do with children? What do they do in terms of transportation? Because all of those things are impacting this person and this family. I think oftentimes what we see, some 80% of the people that come to us are experiencing one form or fashion of financial stress because they're forced to try to make a decision. Do I make a house payment? Do I buy food for the children? Or do I do my medical care? And in most cases, their first option and their instinct and their intuition is, you know what, I'm going to help my children, and I'm going to make sure they have food and they have school supplies and they have the things that they need, and they sacrifice their own personal well-being. And so that's another cost that ends up happening outside of kind of the traditional things we think about. I think one other element that is not always understood is that once they receive a diagnosis, there's obviously the cost of treatment, but there's also the cost of what are their associated drugs that they may need throughout their cancer journey. And all of those just really put a big burden on each patient at a time when they just got hit upside the head with a baseball bat, hearing that they have cancer and the stress and anxiety that's associated with that.
So the cost of cancer is really far beyond the cost of a copay.
Oh, very much so. The copay is just where it starts. And in most cases, the copay may work early on, but most insurance coverage has some kind of lifetime caps or annual caps or things like that can come into really come into view or come into picture because of the expense of cancer over the long term.
Financial toxicity is a real problem. We certainly see it here, obviously in Texas all the time and nationwide. So when a family is devastated, first emotionally by this disease, and then second, financially by this disease, what is the impact that you see cancer having beyond the family, now into the workplace and in the workforce and in the community? You bring up some very good points. It quickly goes from financial to emotional and something within the family to an extended family and kind of concentric rings as they expand beyond the individual to the family and then kind of family of friends and then a workplace. And it's really difficult because workplaces are wanting to continue to have employees and support the workforce and support each individual employee, but oftentimes they're in a scenario where they're left to try to find someone with like skills and ability to kind of help fill in where a cancer patient really needs to be able to focus on their well-being and on their health and on their family situation and not have to try to also bear the burden of responsibilities at the office. And so each employer handles that a little bit differently, but it sure does make it hard for, because all of a sudden some of those costs are borne and kind of transfer over to the employer. And then, as we all know, when that happens in mass, in large metropolitan areas or other, then the community is involved in that. Because literally, if you have one employer and they have a number of employees that are impacted by diseases like this, then that can just kind of expands exponentially into the community. And I think a point you made earlier in our dialogue is just the real impact this can have in small-town America or in rural Texas. Especially in small business. I can imagine the stress it puts on a small business owner who maybe only has 4 or 5 employees, and they've bootstrapped that business, and they want to do the right thing. They want to be there for their employee, and now they're faced with a very difficult situation and a very difficult decision to make. How do I continue to run my business, and how do I continue to support this employee? Exactly right.
And I think the other element there that's worth noting, especially with those small businesses, is if they're fortunate enough to have an insurance program that this employee is a part of, well, by design and almost by default, the cost of that insurance program, not just for that employee, but for that entire employer, is going to go up because of the claims and the costs associated with that individual. And so, unfortunately, the way the system works is those costs are kind of extrapolated to the other population of employees, and so the employer is left having to kind of carry that burden, not just for that one individual, but for higher premium costs and higher insurance and health care costs across the board. I think this is an example where some of the models that are being explored that are much more holistic try to take much more preventative measures and holistic measures where there's more focus on health and wellness, and in cancer's case, just early diagnosis, so that you're able to catch the disease in early stages, where prognoses are better, but also treatment regimes are easier and they're more digestible, and financially a little easier, not only for the individual to handle, but related employers and or their insurance plans.
Yeah, there is absolutely no line in the budget for cancer.
Being a financial person for much of my life, I've seen a lot of line item budgets, but I've never seen a cancer line item on the budget. And certainly, if you did that, it would probably single-handed be the largest dollar amount on that budget. It's too expensive for families to deal with.
Absolutely. And then the ripple effect is really profound when you start to understand one person's diagnosis with cancer and the ripple effect it can have not only in their immediate family, but then to an employer group, everybody who is employed by them, and it continues. And then that cost is passed on to the consumer. If they're selling widgets, now widgets have to be more expensive in order to cover that increased insurance cost for the whole group.
Precisely, and as you know, with the rate of cancer continuing to grow as our communities get older and more people are diagnosed, I think the latest statistics are one in 2 men, 1 in 3 women are going to be diagnosed, and I think, quite frankly, the women number is actually coming down so that it's even closer and closer to the men. So they're both approaching 1 in 2 people will be diagnosed with cancer during their lifetime. So it's not like you have a population of folks and 10% are going to get that. This is a case where half of the population is going to have a cancer diagnosis in their lifetime. That's why it's something we have to try to get ahead of now, or it will be harder and harder to take control of.
I know that you serve on a task force, and there are a lot of other men and women on that looking at this same problem. Are there any exciting things that you can share with us that's happening in that idea space?
I mentioned early on trying to look at different financial models. And I think that's one of the most promising, that is literally trying to find ways to have value-based financial models where rather than a claims-made basis, there's much more emphasis on health and wellness and nutrition and cost sharing. I think the other thing that happens that we're seeing benefits of is trying to find the best place and the best value for the type of care a patient needs, rather than just having them stay within that member institution or go to, a lab that's associated with that particular doctor. But where's the best place to get a mammogram, for example, and who can do it quick and who can do the same kind of professional job but offer a value for those kinds of clients and patients. So I think there's going to be a lot of conversations around value that continue to come up, and really trying to find ways to explore new models. I know that there are organizations who are being more progressive that are looking at those value-based models because they're self-insured and they're not beholden to a particular insurance carrier, and so they can invest their health care and medical costs in some kind of a value-based model that's focused on health and wellness and prevention and diet, in addition to just the medical things. I think those are a couple of things that are happening. I also believe something that is really exciting, Suzanne, is that 20 years ago, the research that was being done on college campuses and in academic settings, and quite frankly, even in the labs for corporate America, was all focused on the science. And don't get me wrong, I mentioned earlier, we've got to have that scientific element. But so much of the research and the work that's being done now is on these other financial models. We have so much more data that we have access to. I'm not in any way trying to promote one corporate organization over another, but I recently attended a group of cancer doctors from around the country and saw an amazing presentation from IBM's Watson, and the things that we are able to do now with technology, having patient data, and understanding if you're in the Dallas Metroplex area and this is the type of cancer you have, well, here's the last 500 people and where they went and what the cost was and what their outcomes were, and it kind of helps direct people down paths, and we kind of learn from that. And so I think technology will be an amazing friend of ours as we move forward in evaluating data and analyzing data, and more importantly, using that data to make better decisions and more value-based decisions, rather than just going to the doctor that's right next door or going to the lab that's right next door, or more importantly, just using the only treatment regime that particular doctor knows anything about. Some of these technology tools really are able to connect people with clinical trials and other treatment options, especially in rural America, that local doctor may just not have access to because he's trying to be a little bit more of a generalist in those smaller town America communities.
So technology really driving a more personal version, a more value-based version of medical decisions. And
it's kind of scientific and evidence-based because the numbers are what they are. There's no interpretation of that. It's mathematical, and you kind of add that up, and you can kind of see where the values are, and you can see what treatment options are working out. So it's just a way to really look at things in a very different way than we have in the past.
Very exciting things on the horizon. Obviously, a lot of work to still be done. Greg, the work you guys do at LiveStrong is tremendous, and we appreciate everything you do for not just breast cancer patients, but for all cancer patients, no matter where they live.
Well, thank you very much, Suzanne, but I really do. I think this is something where organizations like ours with LiveStrong and Coleman Austin and other organizations very similar, the more we get around the table and are able to cuss and discuss not only the issues and the problems, but the alternatives, and be willing to kind of check our egos at the door and find collaborative solutions that'll work, the better off we're going to be. And I think we've been very, very fortunate that there are many of those relationships are out there and established, and I think we're seeing great progress. I would love to see that, expand broader. As I mentioned earlier, there's some 35,000, nonprofit organizations around the country that are focused on cancer, and I wish they were all talking and sharing and communicating. There's a lot of brilliant minds and a lot of great expertise out there. I just think there's much more collaboration that we can do together. And quite frankly, the 15 million Americans that are fighting this disease, they deserve it. We need to be here to help them and to serve them, and the more we can kind of collaborate together to help solve some of their issues, the better off we're all going to be.
Cancer is a really big forest, complex and costly. We need collaboration more than ever to find the solution just to end this, to start the biggest forest fire in history. Because this is one forest no one's going to miss. A big thank you to iHeartMedia for making each and every single one of these episodes possible. Thanks, Mike. You did an awesome job. Thanks to the Komen Austin team, my intern, Jacqueline, and everyone who support everything we do to make this podcast happen. Susan G. Komen Austin is an affiliate of the Susan G. Komen Breast Cancer Foundation. And if you need resources, information, or maybe you've got a comment about this or any one of our episodes, I hope you'll reach out. You can find us at KomenAustin.org or send me an email at podcast@KomenAustin.org. We'll talk to you next time, but until then, I hope that you will always be more than pink.